Good afternoon, my name is Alfred. I'm a solicitor in the white collar crime and international protection teams here at Gherson, and today I'm joined by Thomas Catty, the partner in the white collar crime team, and today we will be talking about Interpol. So Tom, in simple terms, what is an Interpol Red Notice?
Of course, an Interpol Red Notice is effectively an alert against someone's name that can be disseminated across all of Interpol member countries, and there's almost 200 of those countries. The scenario when an alert might be relevant is if somebody commits a crime in a country, a specific country, let's say the UK, and then that person disappears. The UK might want to try and locate that person for the purposes of prosecuting them for that crime. If the UK don't know where that person is, they can effectively put out via Interpol an alert in that person's name across all the Interpol member countries. And what that means is if the person who's on the run travels to or from one of the Interpol member countries, they will be flagged, and that can be then reported back to the UK authorities, who can decide what they want to do.
Is a red notice the same as an international arrest warrant?
No, but at international, going back to my scenario, if the UK wants to find that person and they issue an international arrest warrant, that can lead to an Interpol red notice. But the important distinction is if someone travels to a country where they're flagged on an Interpol red notice in circumstances where there's an international arrest warrant, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person will be arrested in the country that they travel to. The decision to arrest that individual will very much depend on the country that they travel to, rather than the country that is seeking to find them.
Can you be arrested in the UK because of a red notice?
The short answer is potentially yes. So if someone were to have a red notice from a separate country and were to come to the UK, if, for example, the UK and that country had good extradition arrangements, then in those circumstances there is a risk that they would be arrested in the UK.
Is my understanding correct that there is no international police force or Interpol police force, but rather Interpol is sort of a mechanism for police forces across the globe to cooperate?
That's exactly right. The best way to see Interpol is as a database where if a country wants to locate someone, they input that person's data into Interpol. Interpol will then disseminate that to its various member countries. Each of those countries has what's called a National Central Bureau, which is the arm of enforcement in that country that liaises with Interpol. For example, in the UK, it's the National Crime Agency.
Who would be prosecuting that extradition? Would it be Interpol or would it be the UK authorities?
The National Crime Agency or the local police would be the body that would effect the arrest. But in the UK, the Crown Prosecution Service would bring extradition proceedings, but they would be acting on behalf of the country that made the request. So in the situation where France made a request, the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK would be acting on behalf of the French authorities in effecting any extradition attempts.
The UK National Crime Agency would, in effect, be little more than a postbox operating through the NCB. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they might get slightly more operationally involved. They might, in some circumstances, they might seek out and arrest someone if there were the proper arrangements in place in the UK. But generally, it would have to go before a court in the UK. The extradition proceedings would have to be initiated before someone could be arrested.
How would you actually find out that you are on the Interpol Red Notice list?
There's ultimately two lists that Interpol maintain. They maintain a public list and a private list. The public list is very much the tiny tip of the iceberg. Only a tiny proportion of Interpol Red Notices are put on. If someone is being looked for, they don't necessarily want that to be publicised, so they have the element of surprise. So the vast majority of cases are on the private list. It is possible to make inquiries with Interpol as to whether you're on the list or whether Interpol are publishing your data is the more technical term. There is a process to be followed, but you're not guaranteed to get a positive response. It's quite a technical exercise, and generally you're recommended to engage lawyers to assist with that process. But it is possible to make inquiries.
How can an Interpol Red Notice be challenged?
Again, another great practical question, and often the second question that we're asked by people. I mean, the short answer is Interpol is governed by a very detailed and complicated set of rules. And the way to challenge a red notice is to demonstrate that for whatever reason those rules aren't being complied with. That is a technical exercise that's very fact specific. It involves an examination of the specific circumstances of the situation and then an application of that against Interpol's rules. And again, it's a situation where you'd be recommended to engage specialist lawyers to assist to ensure the best chances of success.
And in that application or in those submissions made to Interpol, would it be recommended to adduce evidence, whether witness testimony or expert evidence, in support of any application for deletion of a red notice?
The only thing to bear in mind is when you do provide the evidence to Interpol, what is going to happen to that evidence, because the likelihood is Interpol will then onward share that with the country that is seeking to extradite you. And what you don't want to do is give Interpol information that could be detrimental to your case.
With respect to Interpol, in the event you receive a negative determination on your application for deletion of a red notice, are there appeal mechanisms in place?
There are. It's quite difficult. The process would be you'd write to the Interpol CCF 4 times a year. They consider their cases and then you get a decision. Once you have that decision, the circumstances in which you can challenge it are if a new fact becomes apparent, which is obviously very fact specific, and you have a time limit to do that.
So the advice would be presumably be very careful with that first submission, because it may be your only bite at the cherry.
That's exactly right. You need to make sure that it's perfect and it covers everything and it's very considered. Yes, exactly.
How long does a red notice actually stay active?
I mean, it can be a while, as long as the country that requested that measure has an operational reason to request a red notice, then it can stay in place.
I mean, in a few cases here at Gherson, I've come across inquiries dating all the way back to the 90s. Have you seen many of those sorts of cases?
Yes, every once in a while we do get instructed in relation to a very old red notice. There are ways to challenge that. I think, like most situations, the longer that scenario has been in place, probably the more ground you will have to challenge it. But that's not to say that's guaranteed.
How does Interpol react if you're able to demonstrate to them that a red notice is in fact politically motivated?
If you can prove that a red notice is politically motivated, Interpol shouldn't be involved in that process. We would say you have a very strong argument to getting that red notice removed.
Obviously, Interpol is sponsored by all of its member countries. I've heard in the past people mention that there's a sort of higher threshold with demonstrating to Interpol that an application for a red notice is in fact politically motivated. Has that been your experience as well?
My experience with Interpol has been pretty fair. I mean, any organisation that's involved in such controversial measures and has such powers is always going to be subject to some sort of criticism.
In practice, Tom, if somebody is subject to an Interpol red notice, will it affect their travel plans?
Yes, I mean, it will. If you think or know that you're subject to a red notice, you need to be incredibly careful before you travel. Worst case scenario, you'll be picked up on the notice, you'll be detained, and technically you could be then held in custody until any attempt for your extradition is resolved. And obviously nobody wants that. And you really need to take advice in those scenarios before you travel, because the consequences are just too dire.
If you have a fear or suspicion that you may be subject to a red notice, the advice would presumably be to make inquiries with Interpol and receive that confirmation that they are not processing your data before you make any travel plans.
Yeah, obviously you can get that confirmation from Interpol, but that is only valid on the day it was given. If you fear there's an outstanding investigation, then there's other inquiries you can make. And it's also worth mentioning the point that Interpol and extradition are two separate things. You can still be extradited in circumstances where there's no red notice, because extradition is governed by treaties between the countries. So even if you do remove the red notice or get confirmation from Interpol that there is no red notice, it doesn't remove the risk of you being arrested and extradited, which again is why if you're in that sort of situation, you really need to speak to expert lawyers to find out what inquiries you can make to best safeguard your position.
If you're in need of any legal advice, please don't hesitate to contact us.